Hi, and welcome to this week's small group. This is the third session on El Rey Jesus. And what I want to remind you of is what we've learned over the last few weeks. The first week we learned that Jesus is God the King. We investigated some scriptures that led us to that conclusion. Last week we discovered that because Jesus is God the King, He has established His kingdom on earth. And finally, Jesus proves that He is God the King through signs and miracles. That's what we're going to be covering this week. The signs and miracles, the proof that He truly is God the King. I want you to check out the compassion of Jesus as you read Mark chapter 1, verses 29 through 34. And answer these two questions. What would you do in your life to reflect the compassion of Jesus? And how have other Christians showed you the compassion of Jesus? What I want you to see is that sickness reveals the brokenness and deteriorating effects of the fall on creation. Eyes that were meant to see are closed off to light. Ears that were meant to hear are unable to receive sound. Legs that were meant to walk are folded under the body. This world is the world that Jesus came into. But through Jesus' ministry, we see that the present world is not the way it's supposed to be. When Jesus' kingdom comes, the world is changed. And the effects of the fall are reversed in light of King Jesus. Jesus gives us a great hope. Next, I want you to read Mark chapter 1, verse 31. And that's a repeat of one of the verses we just read. But then get somebody else in your group to read Exodus chapter 3, verses 10 through 12. And finally, have one more person read John chapter 9, verses 35 through 38. And that's where Jesus had healed the man born blind. And that's the end of the story. We actually covered that on Sunday. My question to you is, what happens after each miracle in these stories? And what should our natural response to Jesus be for saving us from our sin? And how does our worship and service demonstrate the arrival of the kingdom in this world? What I would like for you to see in those stories is that after each miracle, people either worshiped God or they served God. Sometimes they did both. We should, in the same light, because of the miracle of Jesus dying on a cross for our sins, that was the greatest miracle. In light of that, we should worship and serve Jesus for the rest of our lives. Our worship and service shows the world that God is not done here. He is still working through us. There is still hope. Let's read about another miracle in John chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. If Jesus already knew that He was going to perform a miracle, why did He ask the disciples about buying bread? And what did the disciples' answers reveal about their faith? The reason Jesus asked them about buying bread is because he was testing their faith. He was asking Philip, whose power and authority will you trust? Are you going to trust in your own power and authority, or are you going to trust in mine? And what the disciples' answers reveal is that their faith was too small. And you know what? We can't be in judgment of the disciples because, quite frankly, most of the time our faith is too small as well. Has God ever tested your faith like this? And if He has, maybe a few people can share their story with the rest of the small group. And what is God doing in our lives when He tests our faith? I believe that God uses these moments in our lives to stretch our faith. Because it's not just a test, it actually strengthens our faith and it helps us to grow deeper into our relationship with Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, this story ends tragically. The people end up wanting Jesus' signs and miracles, but they don't want to obey Jesus' authority. They want him to be king for what they can get from him, but not because they want to obey him. And ultimately, when Jesus points this out, when he points out, man, you guys are here for the wrong reasons, most of the people leave him. Have you seen ministries that focus on what you get from Jesus rather than obeying Jesus? What is the difference between being a consumer of God and being a worshiper of God? And finally, how can recognizing this difference shape your relationship with Jesus? And perhaps for some of you who were raised in church or you have some experience in church, you're familiar with the prosperity gospel. In the prosperity gospel, perhaps you've seen it on TV, if you just believe hard enough, God will make you rich. Or if you have enough faith, then you will be healed. And if you just send in your donation of $9.95, you get the point. We've all seen those things. The problem with being a consumer is constantly trying to get something from God. But a worshiper is constantly trying to give to God. And a worshiper is always in a competition with God to see if he can outgive God. And guess what? God always wins that. But it's a joy. The problem is that if you are a consumer, Jesus will never do enough for you. It will never be enough. But if you are a worshiper, Jesus will continually blow your mind. Finally, I want you to close in prayer as a small group this week and ask God for an attitude and desire to worship and serve him. Perhaps one of the things that we should ask is, God, how can I be a worshiper and not a consumer of you? God bless you guys, and I'll see you next Sunday.